Nathan Reed slammed both hands on the hospital reception desk so hard, the intake nurse knocked her coffee across the counter. "My daughter cannot wait. She has a fever of 104, and I don't have the insurance card because my ex-wife took the entire file when she left. So you are going to help me right now." The room went silent. Every person in that waiting area turned to look at this man soaking wet, still in his navy coveralls, holding a 7-year-old girl wrapped in his old field jacket. Nobody moved. And that was the night everything in Nathan Reed's life cracked open because of a woman he hadn't even met yet. Drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. And if stories like this hit different for you, subscribe. You won't want to miss what happens next. The rain had been coming down since 4 in the afternoon, and by the time Nathan Reed pulled out of the naval base at 8:15 that Thursday evening, it wasn't raining anymore. It was punishing. He sat in his truck for a full minute before he even tried to start it, not because the engine was unreliable, though it was, but because he needed that 1 minute, just one. 60 seconds where nobody needed anything from him. He was 36 years old, and he felt every single year of it. His hands rested on the steering wheel, calloused and cracked from 14 hours of crawling beneath military aircraft, replacing hydraulic lines, torquing bolts that hadn't moved in years. There was grease under his thumbnail that no amount of industrial soap ever fully lifted anymore. He'd stopped trying. The dashboard had 3 things taped to it. A photograph of his daughter Lily, age 7, missing her 2 front teeth, grinning like she'd just discovered the secret to the universe. A sticky note that read, "Pick up apple juice, not the kind with pulp. Remember last time." And a small folded piece of construction paper with a crayon drawing of 2 people holding hands in front of what was supposed to be a house, but looked more like a purple rectangle with a door. Lily had written at the bottom in her best 7-year-old handwriting, "Daddy and me, forever." Nathan looked at that drawing every single day when he got into this truck. On the hard days, it was the only thing that made him start the engine. He started the engine. The windshield wipers struggled against the rain, immediately slapping back and forth like they were personally offended by the weather. The heat worked on the driver's side only. The radio picked up 3 stations clearly, and tonight 2 of them were running emergency weather alerts about flash flooding along the coastal highway, the exact road Nathan needed to take to get to his daughter. Lily was at Mrs. Patterson's house. 71-year-old Helen Patterson, retired schoolteacher, lived 4 houses down from their apartment complex, and she was the closest thing to a grandmother Lily had in this state. Nathan paid her $60 a week, which was all he could manage, and Helen pretended that was more than enough, and they both understood the arrangement kept a child safe and a man barely above water. He checked his phone. 2 texts from Helen. 7:42 p.m. Lily ate dinner. She wants to show you something she made at school. 8:05 p.m. Starting to worry about the flooding. Roads on the news. Please be careful, Nathan. He typed back with one thumb while he waited for a red light. On my way. 30 minutes. Lock the door. The light changed. He drove. For 11 years, Nathan Reed had served in the United States Navy as an aviation mechanic. He'd deployed 3 times. He'd worked in conditions that would have broken most people desert heat. Ocean cold, the mechanical pressure of knowing that if he did his job wrong, the men and women in those aircraft didn't come home. He did his job right, every single time. He came home from his last deployment to find his marriage hollow, in a way that 3 years overseas had only made more obvious. Dana had met someone else. She wasn't cruel about it. She wasn't even dishonest. She sat him down at their kitchen table the day after he got back with his sea bag still sitting unpacked by the front door, and she told him the truth. She said, "I waited for you, Nathan. I genuinely did. But there's only so long a person can be a placeholder in someone else's life before they start building their own." He didn't argue. He didn't yell. He asked her one question. What about Lily? Dana's answer surprised him. She didn't want custody, not full-time. She was honest about that too, which somehow made it worse and better simultaneously. She said she loved Lily, but she wasn't built for the daily weight of single parenthood, and she knew herself well enough to know that pretending otherwise would damage Lily more than honesty would. Nathan's lawyer told him he was lucky. Nathan didn't feel lucky. He felt like someone had taken a load-bearing wall out of a house and handed him the roof to hold up with his bare hands. But he held it up. Because Lily was 7 years old, and she had her father's dark eyes and her mother's laugh, and an absolute conviction that every bug she found in the backyard needed to be named and documented, and she was the most important thing Nathan Reed had ever been trusted with. So he held it up. He renegotiated his duty schedule to minimize overnight deployments. He cooked dinner 4 nights a week and learned through trial and catastrophic error how to properly French braid hair. He attended every parent-teacher conference. He volunteered to fix Mrs. Patterson's kitchen faucet 3 separate times, not because it kept breaking, but because Helen was on a fixed income, and he had the skills, and refusing to help someone who was helping him felt like a moral failure. He lived in a 2-bedroom apartment that was fine. Not special. Fine. The carpet had been replaced once since it was built in 1987, and not recently. One of the kitchen drawers only opened if you lifted it at a slight angle and pulled firmly. The water heater made a sound like a disappointed uncle every morning at 6, but it was theirs. And on the nights when Nathan put Lily to bed and sat down on the couch in the quiet, he let himself feel it, not self-pity, because he'd rejected that a long time ago, but the simple, honest weight of a man who was doing the best he could and needed the world to hold still long enough for that to be enough. Tonight, the world was not holding still. The rain intensified as he merged onto the coastal highway, a 2-lane road that hugged the shoreline for about 8 miles before cutting inland. On a clear night, it was beautiful. Tonight, visibility was maybe 40 feet. Nathan turned the defrost up and leaned forward slightly in his seat. He passed 3 cars that had pulled to the shoulder hazards blinking. He understood that instinct. There were moments when the smart thing, the safe thing, was to stop and wait it out. But Lily was waiting. He kept driving. He was 3 miles from Helen's neighborhood when he saw her. At first, it was just a shape. A figure standing on the shoulder of the road just beyond the pale cone of his headlights. He registered it as something off, too still, too exposed, and his foot lifted from the accelerator before his brain had fully processed what he was looking at. Then the lightning hit. Not close, not dangerous, but bright enough to illuminate the highway for 2 full seconds, and in those 2 seconds, Nathan saw everything. A woman, standing in the rain without an umbrella, wearing what looked like a light-colored blazer that was now completely soaked through dark pants, heels that had no business being on wet asphalt, both arms wrapped around herself. Behind her, about 15 feet off the road on a gravel pullout, sat a car that Nathan's mechanic brain immediately identified as a Mercedes S-Class Midnight Blue, this year's model worth more than he made in 2 years, with its hazard lights pulsing in the dark. She wasn't on her phone. That was the thing that hit him. Every person Nathan had ever passed on the side of a road was on their phone, calling someone, texting someone, using GPS, waiting for AAA. Normal behavior in a crisis. This woman was just standing there, both arms around herself, not moving. Nathan had been in enough situations, military, civilian, 3 deployments worth of learning to read people in high-stress moments, to recognize when someone wasn't just dealing with a broken car. He pulled over. The truck fishtailed slightly on the wet shoulder and he corrected it automatically, an adjustment so practiced, it barely registered. He put it in park, left the hazards on, and reached behind his seat, where he kept an old canvas tarp and a spare rain poncho, because the Navy had trained the habit of emergency preparation into him so deeply it had become instinct. He pulled the poncho over his head and got out of the truck. The rain hit him immediately, cold and relentless. He was soaked in about 4 seconds. He walked toward her. She heard him coming and spun around, and what Nathan saw in her face in that moment was something he'd remember for a long time. It wasn't just fear. It was the particular look of someone who had been alone for longer than the last 20 minutes. "Hey," he said, raising both hands slightly, the universal signal for "I'm not a threat." "Nathan Reed, I'm not going to bother you. You okay?" She blinked. Rain was running down her face. She didn't answer immediately, and he could see her doing the calculation, the mental arithmetic every woman does when a strange man approaches in the dark. "My car stopped," she finally said. Her voice was controlled. careful. The voice of someone who had practiced keeping it that way. About 40 minutes ago. 40 minutes, Nathan repeated. You've been standing out here for 40 minutes. I couldn't get a signal. He glanced at the Mercedes, then back at her. Did you call roadside assistance? That car should have. I know what it should have, she said, and there was a flash of something in her voice. Not anger exactly, but the reflexive sharpness of someone used to being underestimated. Then it softened. I'm sorry. Yes, it has an emergency service, but the app keeps timing out. I think there's a cell dead zone here. There is? Nathan said. This whole stretch, 2 miles in each direction. He looked at her again. She was shivering. Her blazer, which had probably cost more than his monthly rent, was completely useless in this rain. You got somewhere you need to be. She hesitated. I have a meeting, she said. Tomorrow morning. I was driving back from. She stopped. I was driving. Okay. Nathan made the decision without drama. My truck's warm. I've got a daughter I need to pick up about 3 miles from here, but I can take you somewhere to get out of the rain first. Gas station about a mile up the road has a phone, and I can call a tow from there. She looked at him. Really looked at him. The kind of look that tries to measure a person quickly under pressure with limited information. You don't have to do that, she said. I know, he said. Another pause. I'm Claire, she said. Nathan. He nodded toward the truck. Come on before you catch pneumonia. She followed him. He helped her up into the passenger seat. The door handle on that side required a specific lift and pull technique he'd long stopped thinking about, but automatically demonstrated, and went back for a dry towel he kept behind the seat. It was an old beach towel faded with a cartoon crab on it that Lily had picked out at a gas station 2 summers ago. He handed it to Claire without ceremony. She looked at it for just a moment at the cartoon crab at the fraying edge, and something moved through her expression that he couldn't quite read. Thank you, she said quietly. He got in the driver's side, cranked the heat, and pulled back onto the highway. The first 2 minutes were quiet. Nathan kept his eyes on the road. The rain hadn't let up. The wipers kept fighting it. Then Claire said, How long have you been in the Navy? He glanced over. How did you? She gestured at the back seat where his duty bag was visible. The name tape, the insignia. 11 years, he said. That's a long time. It's a career, he said simply. She turned forward again, the towel wrapped around her shoulders. She was warming up. Her voice was losing some of its careful edge. You said you have a daughter. Lily, 7. A pause. She's at her babysitter's. I'm already late. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. You didn't make it rain, Nathan said. Claire looked at him. He was looking at the road. No, she said after a moment. I suppose I didn't. They reached the gas station. Nathan pulled in and went inside, while Claire used the landline to call her roadside service. She had to look up the number on a laminated card she kept in her wallet. The backup to the backup. The kind of detail that made Nathan revise his first impression of her slightly upward. A person who carried a backup plan in their wallet wasn't someone who fell apart easily. She'd been standing in that rain because the technology failed, not because she had. He bought a bottle of water and a pack of crackers because it was 8:30 and he hadn't eaten since noon, and also because he had a quiet compulsion to be useful that had been part of his character for as long as he could remember. When he came back out, Claire was off the phone. Tow truck is 45 minutes, she said. I can wait here. You sure? It's fine. Really? She looked at him. You need to get to your daughter. He did. He knew that. But 45 minutes was a long time. The gas station was nearly empty, and the woman standing in front of him had been alone in a lightning storm for the better part of an hour before he stopped. You want a cracker? He said, holding out the pack. She blinked. Then slowly she smiled. It was the first real smile he'd seen from her. Not careful, not controlled. Yes, she said. Actually, yes. They stood under the gas station overhang for 11 minutes while they waited for confirmation that the tow was dispatched. Nathan called Helen to let her know he was 10 minutes out. Lily was apparently upset that it wasn't bedtime yet, and she hadn't been able to show him the thing she made at school. "What did she make?" Claire asked. "I genuinely don't know yet," Nathan said. "But I've been briefed that it's very important." Claire laughed. It came out like it surprised her. "She sounds wonderful," she said. "She's the only thing I'm doing right," Nathan said, and his voice was entirely matter-of-fact about it, not self-pitying, not performing, just stating the arithmetic of his life as he understood it. Claire was quiet for a moment. "I think," she said carefully, "that you might be selling yourself a little short." Nathan shrugged. "Maybe. But in my experience, if you know the one thing you're definitely not failing at, you hold on to it." Before she got back in the tow truck when it arrived, Claire turned to him. "Can I give you something for—" "No," Nathan said. Immediately, not unkind, just clear. She looked at him. "You didn't even let me finish. You were going to offer me money," he said, "and I'm going to tell you no. So we can either do this the short way or the long way." Another pause. "Why?" she asked. It wasn't a challenging question. It was genuine. Nathan thought about it for a second. Not because he didn't know the answer, but because he was trying to find the right words for something he'd never needed to explain before. "Because my father stopped for a man on the side of the road once, when I was about 12. Man's tire was blown, it was winter. He had 2 kids in the car. My dad changed the tire in the snow, wouldn't take anything for it. I asked him on the way home why." Nathan paused. He said, "Nathan, some things you do because they're right. The minute you put a price on them, they're something else." Claire was quiet for a long moment. "Your father sounds like a good man," she said finally. "He was," Nathan said. "He was a better one than me." She didn't argue with that, which he appreciated. The tow truck arrived. Nathan gave the driver the name of a good garage he knew on the main road. The driver nodded. Claire climbed into the cab, then looked back at Nathan one more time. "Thank you, Nathan Reed," she said. And there was something in the way she said his full name, deliberate, like she was committing it to memory. "Drive safe," he said. He watched the tow truck pull out. Then he got back in his truck, looked at the sticky note apple juice. Not the kind with pulp, and drove the rest of the way to Helen Patterson's house. Lily was waiting at the door. She launched herself at him the second it opened, arms around his neck, her small face buried in the cold, wet fabric of his navy coveralls. "Daddy, you're late," she said, which was both an accusation and the most relieved sound he'd ever heard. "I know, Bug," he said, holding her up. "I stopped to help someone." She leaned back to look at him. Serious face, evaluating. Was it important? He thought about a woman standing in the rain with her arms wrapped around herself, not calling for help, just standing. He thought about how she'd looked at the cartoon crab towel. "Yeah," he said. "I think it might have been." Lily appeared to accept this ruling. "Okay," she said. "Come see my castle. I made it from pasta, and Mrs. Patterson let me use the good glue." He followed his daughter inside. He did not think about Claire Bennett again that night. He did not think about the fact that she'd shaken his hand before climbing into that tow truck, a real handshake firm, the kind you give someone you respect, and that she had not let go quite as fast as you'd expect from a stranger. He thought about pasta castles and apple juice without pulp, and the sound of his daughter's voice. That was enough. That was more than enough. But 22 miles away, in a suite on the 14th floor of a hotel that bore her family's name on 3 different walls, Claire Bennett stood at the window and looked out at the rain. She had her phone in her hand. She had already typed his name into the search bar. She had not pressed search. Not yet. Because, for the first time in a very long time, she wanted to hold on to the version of a person that existed before the information, before the profiles and the background checks, and the due diligence that her world required her to apply to everyone she met. She wanted to hold on to the version of Nathan Reed that was just a man. A man who stopped in the rain. A man who wouldn't take her money. A man who'd said quietly and without drama that his father had taught him some things had to stay free of a price tag, or they became something else entirely. She closed the search bar. She put the phone face down on the desk, and she stood at the window for a long time, watching the storm that had just changed her life in a way she couldn't yet name and wouldn't fully understand for weeks. Outside, the rain kept falling, but something somewhere had shifted, and nothing for either of them would ever be quite the same again. The tow truck smelled like motor oil and pine air freshener, and Claire Bennett sat in the passenger seat with her wet blazer folded across her lap and her hands very still in her hands, which was unusual for her because Claire Bennett's hands were almost never still. She ran a company. Her hands were always doing something, signing something, pointing at something on a screen, gesturing through a boardroom presentation, typing responses to emails that arrived at all hours because her operations crossed 4 time zones. Her executive assistant, a sharp 28-year-old named Priya, had once told her that watching Claire work was like watching someone conduct an orchestra with both hands and one foot simultaneously. Claire had laughed at that. Tonight her hands were folded in her lap, doing nothing, and she was staring at the rain on the windshield, and she was thinking about a man who had handed her a beach towel with a cartoon crab on it, and then refused her money with a quiet, absolute certainty that she had not encountered in a very long time. "You doing okay over there?" the tow truck driver asked. He was in his 50s, heavy-set a man who had clearly spent 30 years pulling cars out of ditches and had developed the particular calm that came with it. "Fine," Claire said. "Thank you. That your car, the Mercedes back there?" "Yes." He whistled low and appreciative. "What do you think went wrong?" "I don't know," she said. "It just stopped." "Those systems get complicated," he said, not unkindly. "More computers than engines now, some of these things. Ironically enough, older trucks are more reliable in a storm. Less to fail." Claire thought about Nathan's truck. The door handle that required a specific technique. The heat that only worked on one side. The dashboard with the crayon drawing taped to it. "Yes," she said quietly. "I'm beginning to think you're right." She checked into the hotel using a name her assistant had booked under a habit she'd developed years ago, traveling incognito when she needed to move without being recognized. The hotel wasn't one of hers. It was a mid-range chain near the highway, clean and unremarkable, and the woman at the front desk handed her a key card without looking up from her screen. Upstairs, Claire peeled off her wet clothes, stood in a hot shower until the chill left her bones, and then sat on the edge of the bed in the hotel robe and opened her laptop. She told herself she was checking emails. She was not checking emails. She had typed Nathan Reed, Navy, Virginia into a search engine before she'd fully acknowledged what she was doing. The results were sparse, which she hadn't expected. In her world, everyone had a digital footprint wide enough to walk across. Executives, investors, contractors, even junior employees. They all had LinkedIn profiles and conference mentions and press quotes and social media presences carefully curated to say, "I am successful. I am connected. I am worth knowing." Nathan Reed had almost nothing. A mention in a local newspaper from 4 years ago. A community event at the naval base where he'd helped organize a fundraiser for the family of a fallen serviceman. His name was third in a list of volunteers. The article described him as a naval aviation mechanic and nothing else. A comment on a neighborhood app from someone named Helen Patterson. "Thank you to Nathan R. for fixing my porch steps last weekend without being asked. This is what community looks like." That was it. Claire sat back and looked at the screen. She was 41 years old. She had built her family's hotel company from a struggling regional chain into a nationally recognized hospitality brand. She had been featured in 3 business magazines, invited to speak at 2 industry conferences, and had recently been profiled in a piece about women reshaping the luxury travel sector. She had a contact list with 400 names in it, and she knew the financial history, professional background, and general reputation of most of them before she ever sat down in a room with them. Nathan Reed had a mention in a community volunteer list and a compliment from a 70-year-old woman about porch steps. And somehow, sitting in a hotel room in wet hair and a borrowed robe, Claire felt like she'd found something more honest in those 2 references than in the last 100 professional bios she'd read. She closed the laptop. She did not sleep well. She kept thinking about what he'd said. Some things you do because they're right. The minute you put a price on them, they become something else, and how his voice had sounded when he said it. Not righteous. Not performative. Just certain. The way you speak about a thing you've believed for so long that arguing about it seems like a waste of everyone's time. By 6 in the morning, she was dressed. By 6:15, she was on her phone with Priya, who had been awake since 5, because Priya was constitutionally incapable of sleeping past 5, regardless of what time zone she was in. Cars at a garage on Route 17, Claire said. I need you to find out what's wrong with it and arrange transport for me to the Richmond office by 9. Already on it, Priya said, which meant she had been on it since Claire texted her from the tow truck the night before. Also, you have a message from your brother. He called the main office line last night at 10:30. Claire's hand tightened around the phone. What did he want? A brief pause. Priya chose her words carefully, which was one of the reasons Claire had kept her for 3 years. He said he wanted to discuss the Henderson property acquisition. His exact words were that he had concerns about the timeline you've set and felt the board should revisit the decision. The board already made the decision. I know that. 3 weeks ago. I know that too. Claire breathed. Tell him I'll call him Thursday. He said it was urgent. Everything my brother considers urgent is actually just something he wants to control, Claire said. Thursday. Priya said nothing, which was her professional way of saying, understood, noted, and also I agree with you. Claire hung up and stood at the window. The rain was gone. The morning was gray and clean, and the highway below her was already moving with early traffic. Normal people going to normal jobs. Nobody stopping to think about what the woman on the 14th floor had decided to do differently today. She made a decision. It was by her own admission later, not a rational business decision. It was the kind of decision that a 30 years of corporate logic brain would reject on its face. She made it anyway because the alternative was to drive away from this coast and resume her actual life without ever knowing whether what she'd felt standing in that rain, that strange, specific sense of being genuinely seen rather than assessed, was real or just the product of adrenaline and low blood sugar. She called the garage. The mechanic who answered confirmed that her car had suffered an electrical system failure consistent with water intrusion, rare in that model, he said, but not unheard of in extreme weather. He estimated 2 days for repair. That's fine, Claire said. Keep me posted. Then she asked the front desk for the number of a car service. And then, because she had 30 minutes before the car arrived, and she didn't believe in wasting 30 minutes, she ordered breakfast, sat down at the desk and opened the files her operations director had sent her 2 days ago. The files that had been making her lose sleep for a different reason entirely. 3 weeks ago, a routine audit of her company's Mid-Atlantic properties had flagged something her finance team hadn't fully understood but had been uncomfortable enough about to escalate. Service contracts across 7 hotels, HVAC systems, plumbing infrastructure, electrical maintenance were running 40 to 60% over the industry benchmark. Not by a little. By a number that when Claire's auditor put it in a spreadsheet and multiplied it across the contract duration, added up to somewhere between $2 and $3 million in overcharges over the past 18 months. Her CFO believed it was a pricing issue, vendors taking advantage of a seller's market charging premium rates because they could. Her operations director believed it was a systems issue, that the company had grown too fast and nobody had built proper oversight into the procurement process. Claire believed it was something worse. She believed someone was stealing from her, methodically, patiently, in amounts small enough that no single line item triggered an alarm, but large enough that the cumulative damage was material. She just couldn't prove it. And she couldn't bring in outside forensic accountants without tipping off whoever was doing it, and she couldn't trust her own operations team to investigate because she didn't know yet how far it went. She looked at the files. She looked at the numbers. She looked at the contractor names. Then she thought about a man who'd spent 11 years working on military aircraft, where the consequence of missing something was a plane that didn't come home. She thought about how he'd looked at her roadside service situation, not panicked, Not dismissive, just methodically assessing what the actual problem was and what the actual solution was. She thought, "Stop it, Claire. You met him for 20 minutes in a rainstorm." But the thought didn't entirely go away. The car service arrived and she went to Richmond. The meeting was fine. She said the right things, asked the right questions, reviewed the proposals on the table. Her regional director, a capable woman named Joanna, presented the Q3 numbers with the confidence of someone who knew the results were good and was enjoying saying so. Claire listened, responded approved. 2 initiatives tabled a third for more data, and was back in a car by 1:15. On the drive back, her phone rang. It was a number she didn't recognize. "Virginia area code," she answered. "Ms. Bennett." A man's voice, familiar in a way that took her a half-second to place. "This is Nathan Reed. We met last night. You gave the garage your number as a secondary contact. They needed a signature authorization for a part, and they couldn't reach you, so they called me since I'd recommended them. I'm sorry to bother you. I told them I'd pass the message." Claire sat up slightly in the back seat. "Nathan," she said, "you didn't bother me." A brief pause. "Okay," he said. "I'll let you know the part they need is a relay module for the electrical system. Jimmy the mechanic. He's good. He won't overcharge you. He'll have it done by tomorrow afternoon." "Thank you," Claire said. "I appreciate you following up." "Of course." Another pause, shorter. "How was the rest of your night?" It was a simple question. Normal. The kind of thing any decent person says. But Claire found herself answering it honestly, which was not her default mode. "Honest answer, I barely slept," she said. "The storm kept you up?" "No. Thinking kept me up." "That's worse than the storm," he said. "Yes," she said. "It is." A moment of quiet, not uncomfortable. "How's your daughter?" Claire asked. She heard something shift in his voice, a warmth that came in immediately, like he'd been waiting for permission to feel it. "She's good. She showed me the pasta castle last night. It's structurally ambitious. I think there are some load-bearing concerns with the north turret, but I didn't want to discourage the architect." Claire laughed out loud. It startled her driver enough that he glanced in the rearview mirror. "You're funny," she said, and she wasn't being polite. She meant it. "I'm honest about architecture," Nathan said, and she could hear the smile in it. Then, before she could stop herself, before the part of her brain that managed risk could intervene, she said, "I'd like to buy you and Lily coffee, or lunch, whatever works for your schedule, not as payment. Just, I'd like to." The pause this time was longer. "That's not necessary," he said. "I know it's not necessary," she said. "I'm asking anyway." Another pause. She could almost hear him thinking. The same methodical assessment he'd probably applied to her broken car and her roadside situation, not rushed, not careless looking at the actual variables. "Lily likes the diner on Morrison Street," he said finally. "Saturday mornings. They have pancakes shaped like dinosaurs, and she considers it a religious experience." "Saturday morning," Claire said. "What time?" 9 o'clock, he said. "And Ms. Bennett." "Claire." "Claire." A beat. "She's going to talk a lot about whatever she's currently interested in, which this week is the digestive systems of birds. I'm giving you fair warning." "I genuinely cannot wait," Claire said. She meant that too. She hung up and sat back and looked out the car window, and for the first time in a long time, she was smiling for no strategic reason whatsoever. Saturday arrived the way good things sometimes do, quietly, without announcement, in a way that made you feel like you'd stumbled into it rather than planned for it. Claire arrived at the Morrison Street Diner at 5 minutes to 9 in dark jeans, a simple gray top, and flat shoes. No blazer. No watch that cost more than a used car. She had spent an unusual amount of time thinking about what to wear, which was unusual because Claire Bennett had not spent an unusual amount of time thinking about what to wear since approximately the second year of business school, and she wasn't entirely comfortable with what that told her about herself. She saw them through the window before she went in. Nathan was already there, sitting in a booth by the window, and Lily was across from him with a children's menu and a crayon drawing something with the focused intensity of someone who understood that great art required total commitment. Nathan was reading something on his phone, but looking up at Lily every 30 seconds or so, this automatic check-in that he probably didn't even notice he did. Claire watched them for just a moment. Not long. It felt too much like intruding to watch for long. She went in. The diner was warm and smelled like coffee and maple syrup, and that particular combination of things that meant someone had been cooking since very early in the morning. It was about half full, a Saturday crowd of locals, families, a few older men at the counter with coffee who looked like they'd been sitting there since the Eisenhower administration. Lily looked up first. She was 7, and she had her father's dark eyes and a gap where her left front tooth had been. And she looked at Claire with the direct, uncomplicated assessment that children apply to strangers before adults teach them to be diplomatic about it. "Hi," Lily said. "Are you the lady my dad helped in the rain?" "Lily," Nathan said in a voice that was simultaneously a correction and absolutely not surprised. "Yes," Claire said, sliding into the seat across from them both. "I am, and you must be Lily. Your dad told me about your pasta castle." Lily's eyes went wide. "Did he tell you about the north turret?" "He mentioned some structural concerns." Lily turned to Nathan with an expression of profound vindication. "See? She gets it. The north turret is a problem. I told you." "I said I didn't want to discourage the architect," Nathan said mildly. "Not that the turret was fine." "That's the same as saying it's fine," Lily said, with the ironclad logic of someone who had clearly been refining her debate skills on exactly this subject. Nathan looked at Claire. His expression said, "This is my life." Claire thought, "This is a good life." They ordered coffee, Nathan black, Claire black as well, which seemed to register somewhere in Nathan's awareness, because he looked at her coffee, and then back at her with a slight recalibration, and Lily ordered the dinosaur pancakes with a seriousness of purpose that suggested she'd been thinking about this order since approximately Wednesday. "She's been researching birds," Nathan said once the waitress had left. "So if she starts explaining how an osprey processes a fish, please know I did not assign this topic." "I looked it up myself," Lily said, not looking up from her menu. "Because ospreys are interesting, and birds are interesting, and digestion is interesting." "All true," Claire said. Lily looked up. "Do you know about birds?" "Not very much," Claire admitted. "I know about hotels." "What's interesting about hotels?" Lily said with the tone of a child who was genuinely asking and not being rude, which somehow made it more pointed. Claire thought about it. "Honestly, a lot of it isn't that interesting," she said. "But sometimes you get to help people who are far from home or tired or—" She paused. "Sometimes a person just needs somewhere that feels safe for a while. And if you do the job right, that's what a hotel is." Lily considered this with absolute seriousness. "Like a nest," she said. Claire blinked. "Like a nest," she agreed. Nathan was looking at her. She looked back at him briefly, then looked away. The pancakes arrived. Lily arranged them on her plate with the precision of someone laying out a battle formation, and then began explaining in loving and surprisingly accurate detail the process by which an osprey catches a fish, and then orients it aerodynamically in its talons for efficient flight. Nathan watched his daughter with an expression that Claire would later think about on a long drive back to her office in Baltimore, an expression that was love, obviously, but more specifically, it was the expression of a man who had made 1,000 sacrifices and genuinely did not think of them as sacrifices, who had rearranged the entire architecture of his life around a small person and found in doing so that the new architecture was better. It was an expression she had seen very rarely in her adult life. She thought about her own family. Her brother who called things urgent when he meant controllable. Her father who had built the company and handed it to her with a set of expectations that felt less like a gift and more like a weight. Her world of board meetings and financial projections and the particular loneliness of being the person at the top who was also the person everyone else was either trying to impress or trying to undercut. She looked at Nathan Reed, who had a stain on his jacket sleeve that he hadn't noticed, and who was currently being lectured by his 7-year-old about fish aerodynamics, and she thought, this man has something I don't have. He caught her looking. "You okay?" he asked quietly, while Lily moved on to the subject of osprey nesting habits. "Yes," Claire said. "Just thinking." "Good thinking or bad thinking?" she considered. "Honest thinking." He nodded slowly. "That's usually the hardest kind." "Yes," she said. "It is." After breakfast, they walked to a small park 2 blocks from the diner. Lily ran ahead immediately because the concept of walking at an adult pace was something she found philosophically objectionable. Nathan and Claire walked side by side, not quite slowly, not quite normally, the gait of 2 people who were not sure what they were doing and had decided not to decide yet. "I want to ask you something," Claire said. "And I want you to know it's a professional question, not—" She paused. "I'm not trying to pay you back for the other night. I want that clear." Nathan looked at her sideways. "Okay. What do you know about facility maintenance contracts, specifically service contracts for commercial properties?" He was quiet for a beat. "Why?" "Because I have a problem," she said, "and I've had 3 people look at it who are all telling me different things, and none of their explanations fully add up, and I'm starting to think the reason none of them add up is that none of them want to tell me the thing that actually adds up." Nathan was quiet for a moment. "What kind of problem?" "Someone is overcharging my company," she said, "systematically, across multiple properties, in amounts that looked reasonable individually but are substantial when you add them up." "How substantial?" "Potentially $2 to $3 million over 18 months. Nathan said nothing for several seconds. "And the people telling you different things," he said slowly. "Are they the people who oversee those contracts?" Claire looked at him. He looked back at her. "Yeah," he said. "I see the problem. I can't bring in an outside firm without signaling that I know something is wrong," she said. "And I can't trust the inside people because I don't know who's involved." "What do you need?" "I need someone who can look at these contracts without a stake in what they find," she said. "Someone who knows how maintenance systems work, who can recognize when numbers don't match the actual cost of the work, and who—" She stopped. "I need someone who can't be bought." Nathan stopped walking. She stopped too. He turned to look at her directly. "Claire," he said, and his voice was careful and very serious. "I'm a Navy mechanic. I understand aviation systems and general facility maintenance, and I can read a contract. But I'm not a forensic accountant. I'm not a lawyer. And I work for the United States Navy. I can't just—" "I'm not asking you to leave the Navy," she said. "I'm asking if you'd be willing to look at one property, on a weekend, off the books as a consultant. Look at the service records against the contracts, against the actual systems in the building, and tell me if what I'm paying for is what I'm getting." Nathan looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked over at Lily, who had found a stick and was using it to investigate something at the base of a tree with forensic intensity. "Which property?" he said. "The one closest to here," she said. "About 20 minutes away. It's a boutique hotel. The service contracts on it are running 60% over benchmark." He didn't answer immediately. "I'm not doing it because you need me to," he said finally. "I want to be clear about that. If I do this, it's because it sounds like someone is stealing from you, and that bothers me." "That's the right reason," she said. "And I'm not taking money for it." She started to say something. "We're doing this the short way," he said, and he used exactly the tone he'd used that night at the gas station, and it stopped her argument before it fully formed. "Okay," she said. "Okay," he said. Lily came running back holding the stick and something else, a small, perfectly round gray stone, which she presented to Claire with the gravity of a person presenting a significant artifact. "This is a lucky stone," Lily informed her. "You can tell because it's perfectly round and gray ones are luckier than brown ones." Claire took the stone and held it in her palm. "How do you know?" she asked. Lily looked at her with the patient expression of someone who had clearly explained this before and was willing to explain it again. "Because I decided," she said simply. Claire closed her fingers around the stone. She kept it. 3 days later, on a Tuesday afternoon, when Nathan had an overnight maintenance training on base and arranged for Lily to stay with Helen Patterson, Claire met him at the Harrington House Hotel, a 42-room boutique property that her company had acquired 2 years ago, and that had been bleeding money in ways that the quarterly reports made look like a cash flow issue, but Claire suspected were something more deliberate. Nathan showed up in civilian clothes, dark jeans, a plain jacket, and carried a legal pad and a pen, which somehow made him look more serious about this than if he'd arrived with a laptop and a briefcase. He had a copy of the service contracts Claire had emailed him printed and annotated in the margins in handwriting so precise it looked almost mechanical. The property manager, a nervous man named Gerald, who had clearly not been briefed on who Nathan was or why he was there, showed them around. Nathan said almost nothing for the first 40 minutes. He looked at things. He looked at the HVAC units on the roof, and then looked at the service records Gerald provided, and then looked at the units again. He opened access panels that Gerald seemed surprised anyone would open. He checked serial numbers. He looked at the plumbing riser diagrams, and then crouched down in a maintenance corridor and looked at the actual pipes. Gerald hovered, growing progressively more uncomfortable. At one point, Nathan asked a question so specific about the date of a particular valve replacement that Gerald had to call someone to find the answer. And while Gerald was on the phone, Nathan stood up and looked at Claire and said very quietly, "This valve hasn't been replaced in at least 5 years. The service record says it was replaced 14 months ago." Claire kept her face neutral. "You're certain? The corrosion pattern is not 14 months old," he said. "I've looked at thousands of maintenance records. The physical evidence doesn't match the paperwork." "That's one valve," she said. "Neutral. Testing." "It's never one valve," Nathan said. He was right. Over the next 2 hours, he found 6 discrepancies between the service records and the physical condition of the systems they were supposed to document. A compressor that had allegedly been serviced and calibrated 8 months ago showed signs of having not been touched in 2 or more years. Filters that were logged as replaced were not replaced. A repair to an electrical panel that had been billed at $4,000, Nathan stood in front of the panel, opened it, looked at it for about 30 seconds and said flatly, "This repair didn't happen, or if it did, they took out what they put in." Gerald had stopped hovering and was now standing at the far end of the corridor, looking like a man who needed to make a phone call but was afraid to make it while they were watching. When they were done and outside, Nathan handed Claire his annotated copy of the contracts. Every discrepancy was circled in red ink. Next to each one in his precise handwriting was a brief notation, the billed service, the expected evidence of that service, and what was actually present. "This is not a pricing problem," Nathan said. "No," Claire agreed. "And this isn't someone cutting corners to save time and billing anyway," he said. "The work orders are too specific. The billing is too precise. Someone understood the contract terms well enough to know exactly what to document on paper, and then either not do the work or undo it afterward." "That's what I thought," Claire said. "You need a lawyer," he said. "And you probably need law enforcement." "I know. And you need to be very careful about who you tell before you do that," he said. "Because whoever is running this has someone on the inside. You don't sustain this kind of fraud across multiple properties without cooperation." "I know that too." He looked at her. "You've known this for a while," he said. "Not an accusation, an observation." "I've suspected it," she said. "I couldn't prove it." "Can you prove it now?" She looked at the annotated contracts in her hand. "I can prove that what I've been told happened did not happen," she said carefully. "That's a start." Nathan nodded slowly. They stood in the parking lot of the Harrington House Hotel on a Tuesday afternoon in October, and the sun was coming through the trees at the kind of angle that made everything look temporarily better than it was. And Claire looked at this man who had printed out her contracts and annotated them in precise handwriting, and spent 2 hours crawling through maintenance corridors because someone was stealing from her, and it bothered him. And she felt something she hadn't expected to feel. She felt like she was not alone in this. That was a strange feeling. She'd been alone in it, in the running of the company, in the weight of the decisions, in the knowledge that the people around her had interests that didn't always align with hers for so long that she'd stopped expecting otherwise. "Nathan?" she said. "Yeah. Thank you." He looked at her. "Don't. I'm not paying you," she said. "I'm thanking you. Those are different things. Even your father would have to agree with that." Something moved in his expression. A quiet thing, almost invisible. "Yeah," he said after a moment. He probably would. They stood there for another moment in the afternoon light in the parking lot of a hotel full of fraudulent maintenance records, and neither of them said anything about what was building between them, because neither of them was ready to name it yet. But it was there, the way it had been there since a rainy night on a coastal highway, when a man in an old truck stopped because his father had taught him that some things you do because they're right. And the woman standing in the rain had been the kind of person worth stopping for. Neither of them fully understood yet what that meant. But the gray stone was still in Claire's jacket pocket, and Nathan's legal pad was already open to a new page. And the work, the real work, the kind that doesn't come with a salary or a title, but only with the particular cost of caring about something enough to fight for it, was just beginning. Part 3. The Cost of Trust. The lawyer's name was Margaret Holt, and she had been practicing corporate litigation in the state of Virginia for 23 years, and in that time she had developed a particular expression, a slight narrowing of the eyes, a very controlled stillness of the face that she deployed whenever someone brought her something that was simultaneously worse than they'd admitted and better documented than she'd expected. She wore that expression for approximately the first 45 minutes of her meeting with Claire. They were in Margaret's office on the 14th floor of a building in downtown Norfolk, and Claire had brought 3 things: a copy of Nathan's annotated service contracts, a summary document she'd prepared herself over the previous 48 hours, pulling together the billing records across all 7 flagged properties, and a very strong cup of coffee that she'd bought on the way up and had not yet touched because she was too tense to drink it. Margaret looked at the annotated contracts first. She went through them slowly, page by page, without saying anything. Occasionally, she made a small mark with her own pen. Once she went back 3 pages to compare something. She did not rush. Claire sat across from her and waited, which was something she was not naturally good at, but had learned to do over years of boardrooms and negotiations, the discipline of stillness, of letting a process move at the speed it needed to move, rather than the speed she wanted it to move. Finally, Margaret set the documents down. "Who did this analysis?" she said. She tapped the annotated contracts. "The physical assessment. Who went to the property and documented the discrepancies?" "A consultant," Claire said carefully. Margaret looked at her over her glasses. "A consultant with a name. A consultant I trust." A long pause. "Claire," Margaret said, and her voice shifted into the register that Claire recognized as the lawyer's real voice, the one that wasn't performing professional neutrality. "I've worked with your company for 6 years. I've seen your contracts. I've reviewed your acquisition documents. I've negotiated on your behalf. So when I tell you that what I'm looking at right now is the kind of documentation that makes a fraud case, I need you to understand that I'm not saying that lightly." Claire felt something settle in her chest. Not relief exactly, more like the particular steadiness of knowing that the thing you feared was real, and that reality, however difficult, was at least something you could work with. "What kind of time frame?" Claire asked. "Depends on how far this goes and who we name," Margaret said. "If it's the contractors acting alone, we're looking at civil fraud, potential criminal referral, and a recovery action on the overcharges. If there's someone inside your organization..." She paused. "That's more complicated, more sensitive, and significantly more important to handle correctly." "I know there's someone inside," Claire said. "I don't know who yet." "Then the first priority is finding out," Margaret said, "before they find out that you know." She slid the annotated contracts back across the desk toward Claire. "Your consultant, can this person produce a sworn affidavit if needed, document their methodology? Stand behind this in a deposition." Claire thought about Nathan, about the legal pad, About him standing in a maintenance corridor, looking at a valve with the calm attention of a man who had spent 11 years making sure things that flew through the air didn't fall out of it. "Yes," she said. "Without a doubt." Margaret nodded. "Then get me that name when you're ready. In the meantime, I'm going to refer you to a forensic accounting firm I trust. I want them to go through the billing records independently without access to your consultant's findings, so we have two separate lines of evidence that corroborate each other." "Understood." "And Claire." Margaret held her gaze. "Don't tell anyone at your company about this. Not your CFO, not your operations director, not your brother." Claire said nothing. "I'm specifically including your brother," Margaret said, "because he called my office 2 days ago asking questions about your recent travel schedule." The room went very quiet. Claire kept her face still. It was something she was very good at. "What kind of questions?" she said. "The kind that someone asks," Margaret said slowly, "when they're trying to understand what you've been doing and who you've been talking to." Claire picked up her coffee. It had gone cold. She drank it anyway because she needed something to do with her hands that wasn't what she actually wanted to do with her hands, which was put them flat on the table and hold on. "All right," she said. "I'll be in touch." She was in the elevator before she let herself process it. Her brother, Ryan Bennett, was 38 years old, 2 years younger than Claire, and he had spent the majority of his adult life in the position of someone who almost ran the family company. Their father, William Bennett, had handed Claire the CEO title 7 years ago, for reasons he'd explained once, and never fully elaborated on something about temperament, about who wanted to lead and who wanted to control, about the distinction between vision and ambition. Ryan had been in the room when their father said it, and he had smiled the way you smile when you're not smiling. Claire and Ryan were not enemies. They had never been enemies. But they had not been in the genuine sense allies for a very long time. Ryan sat on the board. He attended meetings. He voted. He raised concerns. Always reasonable concerns, always framed in the language of corporate responsibility and stakeholder protection, that had a way of landing at exactly the moments when Claire was moving fastest. She had always told herself this was just how families worked when money and inheritance were involved. She had told herself that Ryan was cautious by nature and that caution wasn't malice. She stood in the lobby of Margaret's building and called Nathan. He answered on the second ring, which meant he was not on base probably. "How'd it go?" he said. "The lawyer confirmed it," Claire said. "She wants to use your findings as a primary documentation source. She'll need a statement from you eventually." "That's fine," he said. "Whatever she needs." A pause. "Nathan," she said, "my brother has been asking questions about what I've been doing." A long silence. "Your brother is on the board," Nathan said. It wasn't a question. He'd read enough of the documents she'd shared with him to understand the company structure. "Yes. Does he have oversight of the service contracts?" Claire closed her eyes briefly. Historically, operations contracts fell under a joint review committee that he chairs. Another silence. "Claire," Nathan said, and his voice was quiet and very careful. "I need you to hear me when I say this because I'm not saying it to scare you. In the military, when we were looking at a system failure and we traced it back and found out that the person responsible for oversight of that system was the same person asking questions about the investigation, that's not a coincidence. That's a pattern." "I know," she said. "You already thought it was him." She didn't answer immediately. "I thought it might be someone with access and motivation," she said. "I didn't want it to be him." "No," Nathan said. "You wouldn't." She stood on the sidewalk outside the building. People moved around her going about their Tuesday, and she stood in the middle of it completely still. "What do I do?" she said. And she hated that she was asking, not because she resented needing help, but because she almost never asked. Not out loud. Not like this, without the professional framing, without the corporate language, just the straight question from a person who needed an answer. Nathan was quiet for a moment. "You do exactly what Margaret said," he said. "You don't tell anyone. You let the accountants run the parallel analysis. And you don't change your behavior. You don't act differently around your brother. You don't pull back from meetings. You don't do anything that signals you know something is wrong. And in the meantime, he said, you trust the process, which is the hardest thing I know. But if you move before you have everything, whoever is involved has time to cover tracks. You need to be patient, and you need to be normal. I'm not naturally patient, Claire said. No, he agreed. I've noticed. She laughed, short and surprised. Was that a joke? Mild observation, he said, but with affection. That last part sat in the air between them for a moment longer than it needed to. With affection, Claire repeated quietly. Yeah, Nathan said, and he didn't walk it back. She took the drive back to Baltimore thinking about two things simultaneously, which was not unusual for her. She'd always had a mind that ran parallel tracks, one analytical and one underneath it, processing things the analytical track didn't have language for yet. The first track was the problem. The fraud, the contracts, the forensic accountants. Margaret was bringing in the specific legal and operational steps that needed to happen in the correct sequence to build a case that held up. The second track was Nathan's voice saying with affection and the particular quality of the silence afterward. She had been in relationships, two of them serious enough to involve conversations about the future. Both had ended in the particular way that relationships end when two people are more compatible on paper than they are in the reality of sustained daily proximity, cordially, with genuine regret, with the mutual recognition that something that looked like the right fit had turned out not to be. What she had never had was someone who handed her a cartoon crab beach towel in a rainstorm and refused to take money for being decent, and then spent 2 hours in a maintenance corridor on a Tuesday afternoon because someone was stealing from her, and it bothered him. She didn't know what to do with that. She wasn't sure she needed to know yet, but she kept the gray stone in her pocket. 2 weeks passed. In those 2 weeks, several things happened simultaneously, and Claire managed them the way she always managed multiple critical things, by building a wall in her mind between each track and tending to each one separately so they didn't contaminate each other. The forensic accountants came back with preliminary findings that were worse than Claire had estimated. The overcharges weren't 2 to 3 million. They were closer to 4, and they weren't limited to the 7 properties originally flagged. They extended in varying degrees across 12 of her company's 23 properties. The accountants' methodology was different from Nathan's, but their conclusions corroborated his exactly. In the properties Nathan had physically inspected, every discrepancy he had identified was confirmed. In the properties he hadn't inspected, the billing patterns were consistent with the same scheme services billed and documented, but not performed with an internal approver clearing each invoice. Margaret Holt called her on a Wednesday evening. "We have enough," Margaret said. "We're ready to move." "What does moving look like?" Claire asked. "Law enforcement referral," Margaret said. "FBI most likely, given the scale and the interstate element. Simultaneously, I'm filing for a civil freeze on the contractor accounts pending litigation. And I'm recommending you place 3 specific employees on administrative leave pending investigation." "Which 3?" Margaret named them. The third name was not Ryan. Claire sat with that for a moment, the complicated mixture of relief and guilt that came with it, because she had spent 2 weeks holding the possibility that her brother was stealing from their family's company and being prepared to act on it, and now the evidence was pointing elsewhere, and she felt ashamed of having suspected him, even as she recognized that the suspicion had been rational. "What about my brother?" she said. "The questions he asked your office." "Consistent with a board member doing due diligence on the CEO's activities," Margaret said. "Unusual and not particularly appropriate, but not indicative of involvement in the fraud scheme." He could be, Margaret agreed. "But right now the evidence doesn't support it. And we go where the evidence goes." "Okay," Claire said. "Claire, are you all right?" She looked at the ceiling of her office. Through the window behind her desk, the Baltimore skyline was doing its early evening thing, lights coming on against the dark blue of the approaching night, the particular beauty of a city that didn't care about your problems and went on regardless. "I'll be better when it's over," she said. That's the honest answer, Margaret said. She called Nathan after she hung up. He was helping Lily with homework. She could hear Lily in the background explaining something about fractions with the evangelical intensity she brought to every subject she had recently decided was interesting. I can call back, Claire said. No, hang on. A muffled exchange. Then the background noise shifted, and she could tell he'd moved to another room. Okay, what happened? She told him. All of it. The forensic accounts, the 12 properties, the 3 employees, Margaret's timeline. Nathan listened without interrupting. When she finished, he said, How are you doing? Not what happens next. Not what about the legal strategy. How are you doing? I keep thinking about the employees, Claire said. The 3 who are being placed on leave. One of them has been with the company for 9 years. You didn't do this to them, Nathan said. They made choices. I know that, she said. I know that logically. But knowing it logically and feeling it are different things. Yes? That's not weakness, he said. That's just you're a person who cares about the people who work for her. That's not a flaw, Claire. That's the thing that makes you better at this than someone who doesn't care. She was quiet for a moment. I suspected Ryan, she said. I spent 2 weeks thinking my own brother might be stealing from the company our father built. And you didn't act on it until you had evidence that supported it, Nathan said. Or didn't have evidence. Either way, you waited for the truth. I should have trusted him more. Maybe. But you should also have been willing to follow the evidence wherever it went, even if it went there. That's not a failure of trust, Claire. That's integrity. She put her hand in her jacket pocket. The stone was there. Nathan, she said. Yeah, I want to tell you something, and I don't want to make it strange. A pause. Okay. I have very few people in my life, she said, who I talk to the way I talk to you, who I'm honest with the way I'm honest with you. And I'm aware that we've known each other for essentially 5 weeks. And one of those weeks I was managing a fraud investigation while you were doing maintenance training, so it's not like we spent 5 weeks having deep conversations. No, he said. We didn't. But I feel like I know you, she said. I feel like I know who you are, and that's unusual for me. He was quiet for long enough that she wondered if she'd crossed a line she hadn't seen clearly. Then he said, I feel the same way. Simple, undecorated, in the way he said most things that mattered. Okay, she said. Okay, he said. In the background, Lily's voice rose in triumph about something fraction-related. Go help your daughter, Claire said. I'll call you tomorrow, he said. Yeah, she said. You will. The following Thursday, the FBI made contact with Margaret Holt's office. What happened over the next 72 hours was something Claire experienced from inside the particular unreality of a crisis that you've planned for and are still somehow not entirely prepared for when it arrives. The 3 employees were notified through HR simultaneously at 9 in the morning, with legal present and with security standing by to ensure they didn't access company systems after the conversation. One of them, the one with 9 years of tenure, a man named Paul Garrett, who ran operations procurement, sat down when told and said nothing for several seconds, and then said quietly, I need to call my lawyer. Which meant he'd already talked to a lawyer. Which meant he'd been expecting this. Claire wasn't in the room. She was in her office on the floor above, with Margaret and the FBI liaison, and her CFO, who had been brought in that morning for the first time, and whose expression of shocked dismay Claire found herself watching carefully. It was the kind of expression that was either genuine or very well performed, and she'd been watching people in high-stakes rooms for long enough that she thought it was genuine. She hoped it was genuine. She was tired of questioning people she'd trusted. The day was long. There were statements and document releases and a conversation with her communications director about a press statement that would be carefully calibrated to say what was true without saying more than was legally appropriate. At 4 in the afternoon, Margaret knocked on her office door and came in and sat down across from her desk. It's moving, Margaret said. Garrett is talking. He has a lawyer, but the lawyer is telling him to cooperate. The contractor accounts are frozen. We'll have a preliminary hearing date within the month." "What's Garrett saying?" Claire asked. "That he was the internal approver for the fraudulent invoices," Margaret said. "That he received kickbacks from the contractors. That he acted alone inside the company." "Do you believe him?" Margaret considered. "I believe that's what he's saying. Whether it's fully true will come out in the investigation." Claire nodded. "And Ryan?" she asked, and hated that she was still asking. "Ryan has not been named by Garrett," Margaret said. "His name has not come up." "All right." Margaret looked at her with the particular attention of someone who had known her long enough to read beneath the professional surface. "You should go home, Claire," she said. "The crisis management phase is over for today. There will be more tomorrow and the day after. Go home." Claire went home. She sat in her apartment in Baltimore, a beautiful apartment, high floor, good light, the kind of place that looked exactly like what a successful 41-year-old CEO should live in, and she thought about how quiet it was. She called Nathan. He answered in 4 seconds, which was faster than usual. "It's done," she said. "For today." "How are you, tired?" she said. "Relieved. Still a little sick about Paul Garrett, which I know doesn't make sense because he was stealing from me." "It makes sense," Nathan said. "You're not supposed to feel nothing." "I feel too much," she said. "I always have. I've spent 20 years building ways to manage it in professional settings, and I'm very good at managing it, and tonight I don't want to manage it." A pause. "Then don't," he said. She leaned her head back against the couch. "Tell me about Lily's day," she said. And Nathan Reed, 36-year-old Navy mechanic and single father and accidental forensic consultant, told her about his daughter's day. About how Lily had informed her teacher that the school's bird feeder was attracting the wrong species because the seed mix was wrong, and presented a handwritten report to support this claim, which had resulted in a parent-teacher conference that Nathan described as simultaneously the most proud I have ever been and the most embarrassed. Claire laughed. She laughed until her eyes were wet, and she wasn't entirely sure all of it was laughter, but Nathan kept talking, kept the warmth of it coming through the phone, and she held on to the sound of it, the way she'd held on to the stone. She did not feel alone. That was new. That was the thing she hadn't expected. Not the fraud case, not the resolution, not even the complexity of what was developing between her and Nathan, that neither of them had put a name to yet. The thing she hadn't expected was the simple, radical fact of not feeling alone. It had been so long that she'd almost forgotten what it felt like. 4 days later, Ryan called her. He called on a Saturday morning early, and she was still in the kitchen with her coffee and her laptop when the phone lit up with his name, and she felt the complicated knot of guilt and wariness that had lived in her chest for the past 3 weeks pull tighter before she answered. "Ryan," she said. "Claire." His voice was different from usual. Not the boardroom voice. Not the concerned brother voice he used when he was raising concerns in meetings. Something raw. "I need to talk to you." "Okay." "Not on the phone. Can I come to Baltimore?" She looked at her coffee. "When?" "Today. This afternoon. I'll drive up." "Ryan, if this is about the investigation..." "It's not about the investigation," he said. "I mean it is, but that's not Claire. I need to talk to you about Dad." She went very still. Their father, William Bennett, was 73 and had been in declining health for the past 2 years. He lived in a managed care facility outside of Charlottesville. Claire visited monthly. Ryan visited when he could, which was less often than Claire thought was appropriate, but more often than she usually said. "What about Dad?" she said. "He's been asking questions," Ryan said. "About the company, about you, about what's happening. Someone told him about the fraud investigation. I don't know who, and he called me and he was scared, Claire. He was scared and confused, and he asked me if you were okay, and I didn't know what to tell him because I'm not. Because for the past 3 weeks I've been trying to figure out what you were doing, and I couldn't reach you, and..." He stopped. She heard him take a breath. "I called that lawyer of yours," he said. "Holt. I know that wasn't appropriate. I was worried about you, not about the company, about you. Claire sat with this for a long moment. You were worried about me, she said. You went quiet, he said. You stopped answering my calls. You were traveling, and nobody in the office could tell me why. And then someone told Dad something and he was scared and I... Another stop. I know we're not... He seemed to be choosing words carefully. I know things between us aren't easy. But you're my sister. And Dad asked me if you were okay and I didn't know how to answer him. Claire put her hand flat on the kitchen table. She thought about Nathan saying, you didn't act on it until you had evidence. That's not a failure of trust. That's integrity. She thought about how integrity and trust were not the same thing, and how she'd had the first one in the past 3 weeks, and maybe not enough of the second. Come to Baltimore, she said. Come for lunch. Yeah. Yeah, she said. I'll tell you what I can tell you, and we'll call Dad together. A pause. When Ryan spoke again, his voice was different. Not the boardroom voice, not any of the professional voices. Just Ryan, her brother, 2 years younger, who had grown up in the same house she had, and learned the same things, and gone a different direction with them, and was nonetheless calling her on a Saturday morning, because their father was scared. Thank you, he said. Drive safe, she said. She hung up and sat in her kitchen for a moment, and then she picked up her phone and called Nathan. He answered immediately. Ryan is coming to Baltimore today, she said. He wasn't involved. He was just worried about me. Nathan was quiet for a second. How do you feel about that? He said. Like an idiot, she said. You weren't an idiot, he said firmly. You were careful. There's a difference. I suspected my brother of stealing from the family company. You considered the possibility and didn't act on it without evidence, he said. That's not the same thing. Nathan. Claire. I need you to stop being right about everything because it's becoming a personality trait, and it's a lot. She heard him laugh, actually laugh full and surprised, and it was the best sound she'd heard in 4 days. Get through lunch with your brother, he said. Call me after. I will. And Claire? Yeah. It's okay to let people back in, he said. Even the people you had to hold at arm's length for a while. It doesn't mean you were wrong to be careful. It means you were right to be human. She held the phone for a moment after he stopped speaking. Outside, the Baltimore morning was moving along without her. Ordinary and unhurried. And she sat in her kitchen with her coffee going cold and the gray stone on the table beside her laptop, where she'd taken it out of her pocket the night before. And she thought about the extraordinary specificity of finding in the middle of a rainstorm on a highway in Virginia the exact person you needed. Not the person with the right credentials, not the person with the right contacts or the right background or the right professional profile. The person who was right in the deeper way, the way that meant something when the credentials and the contacts and the profile were all stripped away, and it was just 2 people in a truck in the rain, one of them needing help, and one of them not needing anything back. Ryan arrived at 1 o'clock. He stood in her doorway, looking like what he was, a man in his late 30s who had driven 3 hours and was tired and uncertain and trying not to show either. And Claire looked at her brother and felt the particular complicated love of siblings, which is the love that has the most history tangled into it and therefore the least simple. She stepped back and let him in. I made lunch, she said. He looked surprised. You cook now, he said. Someone told me recently that cooking for people was one of the things they were definitely not failing at, she said. I'm trying it on. Ryan came inside. They talked for 3 hours. Not everything. Not the details the lawyers needed contained, not the specifics still under investigation. But the real things. The things that siblings who've been careful with each other for too long sometimes need a crisis to finally say. At 4 o'clock they called their father together, and William Bennett's voice came through the phone sounding older than Claire remembered, and also, when he heard both of his children on the line at the same time, genuinely audibly relieved. Are you both all right? He said. We're both all right, Dad, Claire said. Good, he said. That's all I needed to know. They stayed on the phone with him for 30 minutes, talking about nothing important, which was the most important conversation Claire had in a long time. After Ryan left, she stood at her apartment window in the fading afternoon, and she thought about what a single decision could do. Not a big decision, not the kind that announces itself. The kind that happens on a Tuesday night in a rainstorm when you're tired and late, and it would be completely reasonable to keep driving. Nathan had not kept driving, and here she was. She texted him. Lunch was good. Called Dad. Ryan and I talked. His response came in 2 minutes. Good. How's your father? Relieved, she typed. He just needed to know we were okay. A pause. Then, sounds like he raised you right. She smiled. He did, she typed back. Yours too. Another pause. Longer. Then, yeah. He really did. She put her phone down and stood at the window and let herself feel it, all of it. The relief and the exhaustion and the complicated grief of a hard few weeks and the specific, unfamiliar warmth of having someone she could tell the truth to. And underneath all of it, steady and persistent, the growing knowledge that something was happening between her and Nathan Reed that was not going to be easily categorized or conveniently scheduled or managed the way she managed most things. It was going to require the one thing Claire Bennett had always found most difficult. It was going to require trust. Not the corporate kind. Not the contractual kind. The kind her father had built a company on, and her father's friend had stood in a snowstorm and changed a tire for nothing, and a 7-year-old gave away lucky stones to strangers without needing them back. The kind you gave without knowing what you'd get in return. She picked up the stone from the table. She put it back in her pocket, and she was still standing at the window in the quiet of her apartment when Nathan called, not a text, a call at 6:15 on a Saturday evening, just to talk. She answered before it finished the first ring. Hey, Nathan said, and Claire could hear something in his voice that told her he'd been sitting with his phone in his hand for a minute before he dialed. You picked up fast. I was standing right here, she said. What's going on? Is Lily okay? She's fine. She's asleep. He stopped, started again. I've been thinking about something for about 2 weeks, and I wanted to say it out loud before I talked myself out of it. Claire sat down slowly in the chair by her window. Okay, she said. I'm listening. The properties, he said. The 7, now 12, that got flagged in the fraud investigation. You're going to need someone to rebuild the maintenance oversight system from scratch. Not a consultant who comes in for a week and leaves. Someone who actually understands facility systems and can build something that doesn't just catch the next Paul Garrett, but makes it structurally difficult for there to be a next Paul Garrett in the first place. Claire went very still. Nathan, she said carefully, are you asking me something or telling me something? I don't know yet, he admitted. I've been going back and forth on it for 2 weeks and I still don't have it fully worked out in my head. But I keep thinking about it. About what it would look like to actually build that system. And I have 11 years of thinking about maintenance and safety protocols in a context where getting it wrong means somebody doesn't come home. That's a different kind of pressure than a hotel HVAC system, obviously. But the discipline underneath it is the same. Verify everything. Trust nothing you haven't confirmed yourself. Build redundancy into the places where a single point of failure could cost you everything. You're describing a job, Claire said quietly. I might be, he said. I don't know. I have a career, Claire, 11 years in. I'm eligible for retirement in 9 more. I have a pension waiting for me if I stay the course. I have stability. Lily has stability. I don't take that lightly. I know you don't, but I also keep thinking about that hotel, he said. Standing in that maintenance corridor, looking at a valve that hadn't been touched in 5 years while somebody billed you for a repair that never happened. And I keep thinking I'm good at this. I don't say that a lot about things, but I'm good at this specific thing, and there's a version of my life where I use that skill somewhere that isn't fixing airplane hydraulics for the 400th time. Claire didn't say anything right away. She let the silence sit because she understood better than most people would have what it cost a man like Nathan Reed to say something like that out loud. to admit that he wanted something for himself beyond the version of his life that was entirely organized around duty and his daughter and doing right by other people. "I'm not offering you a job right now," she said finally. "Not because I don't want to, because if I offer you a job 3 weeks after you helped me expose a multi-million-dollar fraud scheme, and you take it, everyone in my organization, everyone is going to look at that hire and see exactly one thing. They're going to see a woman who gave a job to a man because he did her a personal favor." "I know," Nathan said. "And that's not fair to you," she said, "because what you did wasn't a favor. It was the single most rigorous piece of investigative work anyone brought me in this entire process, and you did it for free in your off hours with a legal pad and a flashlight. If I hire you now, nobody is ever going to see that. They're only going to see the story that's easy to tell." "I know that too," he said. "I've thought about it." "So what do we do?" she asked. "I don't know," he said. "I genuinely don't. I just wanted you to know it was in my head, that's all." She looked out at the darkening Baltimore skyline. "Give it time," she said. "Let the investigation conclude. Let the dust settle. If it's still the right thing in 3 months, we'll figure out how to do it in a way that isn't a scandal waiting to happen." 3 months, Nathan repeated. 3 months, she said. "Can you live with that?" A pause. "Yeah," he said. "I can live with that." They talked for another hour that night about nothing important and everything important the way conversations go when two people have stopped performing for each other and started simply being present. Claire told him about her father, about the particular ache of watching a brilliant, forceful man become smaller and more frightened with each passing year. Nathan told her about his own father, not just the story about the tire in the snow, but the man underneath it. A career Navy chief who'd raised Nathan mostly alone after his mother died when Nathan was 9, who had never once in Nathan's memory complained about the weight of it. "He used to say the same thing every night before bed," Nathan told her. "Even when I was too old for it to make sense as a bedtime thing. He'd say, 'Nathan, the measure of a man is what he does when nobody's counting.'" "Is that why you stopped that night?" Claire asked. "In the rain." "Partly," Nathan said. "Mostly I stopped because you looked like someone who needed help, and I've never been able to drive past that. But yeah, somewhere underneath it my dad's voice was there too." "I'm glad it was," Claire said. "Me too," he said, and there was something in his voice that made the words land heavier than their simplicity suggested. The 3 months Claire had proposed did not in the end unfold quietly. Within 2 weeks, word had gotten out. Not officially. Not through any statement Claire's communications team released, but through the particular osmosis that happens in any organization where something significant occurs and people talk. Someone in the legal department mentioned the fraud investigation to someone in operations, who mentioned it to someone in facilities, who happened to remember that a man named Nathan Reed had been walking through the Harrington House Hotel with a legal pad back in October. And within a month, there was a version of the story circulating through Bennett Hospitality Group's corporate offices that was approximately 60% accurate and 40% embellished in ways that made Claire's jaw tighten every time a new version reached her. The most common version went something like this. The CEO had gotten into some kind of accident, been rescued by a random man off the street, and then given him, depending on who was telling it, either a consulting contract, a job offer, or in one particularly creative iteration that reached Claire through her assistant, with visible embarrassment, a marriage proposal. Claire found this both infuriating and privately a little bit funny, though she was careful never to let that second reaction show. What she found less funny was the way the rumor mill had started to affect actual decision-making. It began small. A senior operations director, a woman named Denise Coyle, who had been with the company for 11 years and who Claire genuinely respected, requested a meeting in late November. "I want to be direct with you," Denise said, sitting across from Claire's desk with a folder she hadn't opened. "There's a lot of talk in the building about the fraud investigation and about a man who was brought in to help identify it." "Go ahead," Claire said. "People are saying his name is going to end up on an org chart," Denise said. "That you're planning to create a position for him, facilities director, operations consultant, something like that." "Nothing has been decided," Claire said, which was true. "I believe you," Denise said. But I want to raise a concern because I think it's my job to raise it even if it's uncomfortable. If you bring this man in, whatever his qualifications are, and I understand they may be significant, the perception across this company is going to be that the position was created for personal reasons. That perception is going to undermine his authority before he said a single word to anyone. It's going to undermine trust in the process that exposed the fraud in the first place. And frankly, Claire, it's going to reflect on you in a way that I don't think you're fully accounting for. Claire sat with that. She respected Denise too much to dismiss it, and she was honest enough with herself to know that everything Denise was saying was structurally correct. What would you suggest? Claire asked. If there's a real operational need for this position, and based on what I've heard about the maintenance oversight gaps I believe there is, then post it, Denise said. Formally, externally. Let him apply like anyone else. Let a hiring committee that doesn't report directly to you evaluate the candidates. If he's as good as the story says, he'll get the job on the merits, and nobody will be able to say otherwise. Claire looked at her for a long moment. That's good advice, she said. It's the only advice that protects both of you, Denise said. Him more than you, honestly. You'll survive the gossip. It's harder on the person who has to walk into a building every day where people assume he didn't earn his seat. Claire thought about that for a long time after Denise left. She called Nathan that evening and told him everything Denise had said word for word, because she'd promised herself early in whatever this was becoming that she would not manage information around him the way she sometimes had to manage it around everyone else. Nathan listened without interrupting. She's right, he said when Claire finished. I know she's right, Claire said. I just hate that she's right. Why? Because it means doing this the hard way, Claire said. Posting the position, a formal search, a hiring committee, months probably before anything is settled. And there's a real chance, Nathan, that even with all of that, you don't get the job. Someone with an MBA and 15 years in commercial facilities management applies, and on paper, they look stronger than a Navy mechanic with no civilian management experience, and the committee picks them, and you're left with nothing except the fact that you helped expose a fraud scheme for free, and then didn't even get considered fairly for the job it created. Then that's what happens, Nathan said simply. You're not upset. I didn't do the work at that hotel to get a job, Claire, he said. I did it because someone was stealing from you, and it bothered me. If it turns into an opportunity, that's a good outcome. If it doesn't, I still did the right thing, and Lily still has a father who did the right thing, and honestly, that's the metric I actually care about. Claire closed her eyes. You are unbelievably frustrating to argue with, she said, because you keep being reasonable. I've been told that's a flaw, Nathan said, and she could hear the smile in it. It's not a flaw, she said. It's the thing She stopped herself. The thing you what? He asked, and his voice was gentle, not pushing, just leaving the door open. She sat with the sentence she'd almost said. She thought about her father's phone call about Ryan sitting in her kitchen, about the accumulated weight of the last 2 months, and how much of it had been carried quietly and without complaint by a man who had absolutely no obligation to carry any of it. It's the thing I've been looking for, she said finally, without knowing I was looking for it. There was a silence on the line, warm and full. Okay, Nathan said softly. Okay, she said back. The position was posted in December, Director of Facilities Integrity and Vendor Oversight, a title Claire's HR team had workshopped for 2 weeks to communicate both the operational scope and the specific mandate building systems that made the kind of fraud Paul Garrett had run structurally difficult to repeat. The posting went out through normal channels. Nathan applied through normal channels, submitting a resume that Claire was not permitted to see in advance, and did not ask to see, because she had decided with some difficulty that she needed to remove herself entirely from every stage of the process, except the very last one, if it even got there. 41 people applied. The hiring committee, 3 department heads, and an external HR consultant. Claire's team, brought in specifically to eliminate any appearance of internal influence, narrowed the pool to 6 for first-round interviews, then 3 for final rounds. Nathan made the final 3. Claire found out from Denise Coyle, who called her with a voice that was carefully professional but had something warmer underneath it. "He made the final round on his own," Denise said. "I want you to know that because I know you've been staying out of it, and I respect that, and I want you to know it mattered." His interview scores were the highest of the 6 first-round candidates. Not because of sympathy. Because he answered the technical scenario questions better than anyone else in the pool, including a candidate with an MBA from Wharton and 12 years managing facilities for a hotel group twice our size. "How?" Claire asked, genuinely curious, because she'd resisted asking Nathan for details about his own interview. The scenario question was about identifying anomalies in a maintenance record set, Denise said. Most candidates talked about process audits, checklists, software systems. Reed talked about physical verification. He said something the committee wrote down word for word. "Paper tells you what someone wants you to believe happened. The equipment tells you what actually happened. If your oversight system doesn't force those two things to be checked against each other regularly, you don't have oversight, you have a filing system." Claire felt something warm move through her chest. "That sounds like him," she said. "It impressed people who didn't want to be impressed," Denise said. "That's the honest version." The final decision took another 3 weeks, during which Claire did not ask Nathan how he thought it was going. And Nathan, to his credit, did not ask her whether she'd heard anything. And they both existed in the particular tension of two people trying very hard not to let a professional process bleed into a personal relationship that was by this point undeniably becoming something neither of them had officially named. It was late January when Denise called Claire directly at 4:40 in the afternoon on a Thursday and said only, "The committee made an offer today. Reed accepted." Claire sat in her office and let out a breath she felt like she'd been holding for 2 months. "Thank you," she said, "for doing this the right way." "Thank him?" Denise said. "He earned it. Nobody in that room, including me, walked away from this process thinking he got anything he didn't deserve." That was, Claire thought later, the single sentence she cared about most in the entire ordeal. Nathan called her that evening. "I got it," he said, and his voice had a quality she'd never heard from him before, a kind of unguarded joy that cut straight through his usual careful steadiness. "I know," Claire said. "Denise told me. You didn't hear from me first. I wanted you to have this moment without me anywhere near it," she said. "I've barely let myself think about the outcome for 6 weeks. I wanted it to be entirely, completely yours." There was a pause, and when Nathan spoke again, his voice had thickened slightly. "Claire," he said, "I have to tell you something, and I need you to actually hear it, not just accept it politely." "Okay. I would not have taken this job if there had been any question at all about whether I earned it," he said. "I know what it looks like when someone hands you something because of who you know instead of what you can do. My father worked with men who got promoted that way, and he had a particular kind of contempt for it, and he raised me to have the same contempt. If Denise had told me the committee picked me because you leaned on the process, I would have walked away. I need you to know that." "I know that," Claire said. "It's part of why I love—" She stopped hard, the word catching in her throat before she'd fully processed that it had arrived there at all. Silence on the line. A long one. "Claire," Nathan said very quietly. "I didn't mean to say that yet," she said, and her voice was unsteady in a way it almost never was. "I had a whole plan for how and when I was going to say something like that, and it involved considerably less accidental blurting." She heard him laugh, soft, disbelieving, warm. "I've had a plan too," he admitted. "Mine mostly involved dinner, and considerably less crying, because I get emotional about things I don't expect to get emotional about, and I didn't want to cry in front of you the first time I said it." "Are you crying right now?" "A little," he admitted. "Don't tell Lily. I have a reputation to maintain." Claire laughed, and it came out watery too. "I love you," she said deliberately this time, no accident in it. "I wanted to say it properly, but apparently properly isn't really how anything between us has gone, so there it is. Properly late, and probably not how either of us planned it, but true." "I love you too," Nathan said. I think I have for a while. I think I knew it around the time you offered to buy Lily and me pancakes and then let her explain the entire digestive tract of an osprey without once looking like you wanted to be anywhere else. She's a remarkable child, Claire said. It was genuinely fascinating. It was genuinely long, Nathan said, but I appreciate you humoring her. I wasn't humoring her, Claire said. I meant it. I've sat through 4-hour board meetings that told me less about how the world works than that girl explaining fish digestion. Nathan laughed properly, then full and unguarded, and Claire sat in her office with her phone against her ear and the Baltimore evening settling outside her window, and felt for the first time in longer than she could easily calculate entirely and simply happy. Nathan started his new role in mid-February. The transition was not without friction. Claire had known it wouldn't be, and Denise had warned her explicitly that the first month would be the hardest, because even a fair, transparent hiring process couldn't entirely erase the whisper campaign that had preceded it. There were people in the organization, not many, but enough to be a persistent undertone, who continued to refer to Nathan in hallway conversations they didn't realize traveled back to Claire eventually as the CEO's boyfriend, or less generously, the guy who got lucky in a rainstorm. Nathan heard some of it directly. He never mentioned it to Claire unless she asked, and when she asked, he answered honestly but without drama. People are allowed to think what they think, he told her about 6 weeks into the job over dinner at her apartment, a genuine, home-cooked dinner. This time, Nathan's contribution, a roast chicken that he'd clearly made 100 times before, with the easy confidence of a man who'd learned to cook out of necessity and gotten good at it along the way. I can't control that. What I can control is whether the work speaks for itself. And is it speaking for itself? The maintenance discrepancy rate across the properties I've audited so far is down 60% since January, Nathan said. I've renegotiated 4 vendor contracts and terminated 2 that wouldn't submit to the new verification protocols. I've trained 11 facility managers on physical audit procedures that don't rely entirely on paperwork. People can call me whatever they want in the hallway. The numbers are the numbers. Claire reached across the table and took his hand. You built that in 6 weeks, she said. I built the beginning of it, he corrected with the particular precision that was one of the things she loved most about him. It's a 5-year project realistically if we want it to be structurally sound rather than just patched. But yeah, it started. Lily, who was sitting at the end of the table working her way through a plate of chicken and rice with the focused efficiency of a 7-year-old, who considered eating a task to be completed rather than an experience to be savored, looked up. Are you two getting married? She asked with the same direct, uncomplicated tone she'd used the first morning at the diner. Nathan nearly choked on his water. Claire, more composed or perhaps just faster on her feet, said, Would that be all right with you? Lily considered this with the gravity she brought to all important decisions. I'd need a dog, she said finally. If there's a wedding, I get a dog. That's my condition. Duly noted, Claire said entirely seriously. Nathan looked between the two of them, his daughter negotiating terms for a hypothetical wedding, with the confidence of a seasoned attorney, and Claire taking the negotiation with complete sincerity, as though the two of them were equals in this, and felt something in his chest that he didn't have a precise word for. Something adjacent to relief, and something adjacent to joy, and something that was mostly just the simple physical sensation of watching two people he loved understand each other. Nobody's getting married tonight, he said, but the dog thing is noted for the permanent record. Good, Lily said satisfied, and went back to her chicken. Later, after Lily had fallen asleep on the couch during a movie, and Nathan had carried her to the guest room without waking her. A skill honed over years of solo parenting. The particular art of transferring a sleeping child without disturbing the fragile peace of it. He came back into the living room and found Claire standing by the window, looking out at the lights of Baltimore. You okay? He asked, coming up beside her. I keep thinking about something, she said. What? About how close I came to not stopping that day, she said. Not you, me. If my phone had gotten a signal 30 seconds earlier, I would have called roadside assistance myself. I would never have needed to stand on that road long enough for you to find me. I think about that sometimes. How the entire shape of my life turned on 30 seconds of bad cell coverage. Nathan put his arm around her. I think about it differently, he said. How? I think if it hadn't been that storm, it would have been something else, he said. Some other moment where the person I am and the person you are ended up in the same place at the same time, needing the same thing. I don't think the universe generally organizes itself that precisely around cell towers. I think some things find their way to happening regardless of the specific mechanism. Claire turned to look at him. That's either very romantic or very fatalistic, she said. I can't decide which. Can it be both? He asked. I suppose it can, she said, and rested her head against his shoulder, and they stood together at the window, looking out at a city neither of them had grown up in, that had somehow become the place where their entirely separate lives had folded into one. But the peace of that spring did not last uninterrupted, because peace, Claire had learned over 4 decades of living, rarely did. In April, 6 weeks after Nathan's dinner table conversation with Lily about hypothetical dogs and hypothetical weddings, Claire's father passed away. It was not sudden. His decline had been steady for 2 years. And everyone who loved William Bennett had known in the particular way families know these things, without saying them aloud, that the end was approaching faster than anyone wanted to admit. He died on a Tuesday morning in his sleep at the care facility outside Charlottesville, with a caregiver nearby who told Claire later that he had seemed peaceful in his final days, that he had talked about his children with obvious pride in the weeks before, and that he had, in one of his last clear conversations, told the caregiver that he was grateful his daughter had found someone who made her laugh the way she used to laugh before the company had swallowed so much of her. Claire got the call at 6:15 in the morning. She called Nathan before she called anyone else, before she'd even fully processed the words the caregiver had said to her. He answered on the first ring, the way he always did when she called at unusual hours, because some instinct in him had apparently decided somewhere along the way that her calls mattered enough to interrupt whatever else was happening. Claire. She couldn't speak for a moment. Claire, what happened? My father, she said. And the words came out broken in a way that surprised her, because she had always been in every crisis of her adult life the person who held it together. He's gone. He died this morning. There was a silence on the line, and then Nathan said simply, I'm coming. You don't have to. I'm coming. He repeated with the same absolute certainty he'd used the night he stopped his truck on a flooded highway. I'll get Lily to Helen's, and I'll be in the car in 20 minutes. Where are you? My apartment, she said. Nathan, it's a 2-hour drive. I'm coming. He said a third time, and this time she didn't argue. He arrived 2 hours and 10 minutes later, and when Claire opened the door, she fell apart in a way she hadn't let herself fall apart in front of another person since she was a teenager. And Nathan held her in the doorway of her apartment for a long time, saying nothing, because there was nothing useful to say, and he understood the way he seemed to understand most things that mattered, that his job in that moment was not to fix anything, or manage anything, or find the right words. It was simply to be there, to not leave. The way he never had from the very first night. The funeral was held on a Saturday morning at a small stone chapel outside Charlottesville, the kind of building that had been standing long enough to have watched several generations of the same families pass through its doors for exactly this purpose, and Claire stood at the front of it in a black dress that Priya had picked out for her because Claire had not, in the numb days after her father's death, been capable of making a decision as small as what to wear. Nathan sat in the second row with Lily beside him, in a navy dress that Helen Patterson had helped her pick out. Her small hand tucked into his, the entire service. And when Claire stood to speak, because she had insisted on speaking, had told Ryan the night before that their father deserved to be spoken about by the people who knew him. Not just eulogized by a minister who had met him twice. She found Nathan's eyes in the crowd, and held on to them, the way a person holds onto a rail on a boat in rough water. She got through it. She talked about her father's hands, how he'd built the first hotel in the chain himself, literally with tools. Before it was a chain, before it was anything but a single rundown motel outside Roanoke that nobody believed in, except him. She talked about how he'd told her once, years before he handed her the company, that the measure of a good hotel wasn't the thread count of the sheets, but whether a stranger felt less alone after staying there than they had before. She talked about how in his last lucid weeks he'd asked about Nathan by name, had wanted to know if the mechanic who'd found his daughter in a storm was a good man, and how she'd told him yes, and how her father had said, "Then hold on to him, Claire. Everything else you can rebuild. That kind of man you don't find twice." Ryan cried through most of it, sitting beside his wife in the front row, and afterward in the receiving line outside the chapel. He hugged Claire longer than either of them had hugged in years, and neither of them said anything about the fraud investigation or the board or any of the complicated architecture of the family business, because in that moment none of it mattered even slightly. What mattered was that they were both still standing, and their father was not. And somewhere in the last 6 months, without either of them quite noticing it happen, they had become siblings again, instead of merely relations who shared a company. Nathan found her afterward in the gravel lot outside the chapel, standing apart from the crowd, with her arms wrapped around herself in a posture that struck him with sudden sharp force, as almost identical to the way she'd stood on the shoulder of a flooded highway 8 months earlier. He didn't say anything. He just walked over and stood beside her, close enough that his shoulder touched hers, and after a moment she leaned into him, and they stood there together while the rest of the mourners filtered slowly toward their cars. "You did that beautifully," he said finally. "The eulogy. He would have been proud." "He told me to hold on to you," Claire said. "Did I mention that in one of his last conversations? He said everything else I could rebuild, but not—" Her voice caught. "Not that." Nathan was quiet for a moment. "Your father sounds like he understood something important," he said. "He did." Claire wiped her eyes, and Nathan reached into his jacket pocket and produced a handkerchief, an actual cloth handkerchief, the kind almost nobody carried anymore, and she looked at it and laughed despite herself, a wet, surprised sound. "Who carries a handkerchief in this century?" "My father did," Nathan said simply. "I started carrying one after he passed. Felt like a way of keeping something of him close." Claire took it and pressed it to her eyes. "I want to keep something of my father close too," she said. "I've been thinking about it for days. I don't know exactly what that looks like yet, but I think it looks like doing the company right. Building it the way he would have wanted, not just the way that protects the balance sheet. I think it means finishing what we started with the maintenance oversight program and doing it everywhere, not just the flagged properties. I think it means being the kind of CEO he actually raised me to be, not just the one the board expects." "That sounds like a good use of grief," Nathan said quietly. "Is there a good use of grief?" "I think so," he said. "I think grief that turns into purpose is about the best any of us can hope for it to become." She looked at him. "You sound like you're speaking from experience." "My mother died when I was 9, he said. "I've had almost 30 years to think about what to do with that. Some of it I did badly. Some of it I think turned into who I am now, the parts of me that show up for people that don't walk past someone standing alone in the rain. I don't know if that's a fair trade. I don't think grief works in fair trades, but it's what I've got." Claire slipped her hand into his. "I'm glad you're the man who doesn't walk past," she said. "Me too," he said. "Most days." They stood together a while longer in the gravel lot, and then Lily came running over from where Helen had been watching her, her small dress shoes clicking against the stones, and she wrapped her arms around Claire's legs without a word, the way children do when they understand in whatever wordless way children understand things that comfort doesn't always require language. Claire knelt down and hugged her back. "Thank you," she whispered into Lily's hair. "You're welcome," Lily said with the gravity of someone who took hugging very seriously as a responsibility. Then pulling back, she added, "Are you sad? Very?" Claire admitted. "My dad says being sad means you loved someone a lot," Lily said. "So it's like it's a bad feeling, but it's also proof of something good. That's what he told me when our old dog died." Claire looked up at Nathan over his daughter's head. He shrugged, slightly embarrassed the way he always was when his own words got repeated back to him with more weight than he'd intended. "She remembers everything," he said. She's remarkable. Claire said again the same word she'd used the first morning at the diner, and she meant it exactly as much now as she had then. The months that followed were in the particular way that recovery often works, both slower and faster than Claire expected. Slower in the private moments, the evenings when grief arrived without warning, when she'd reach for her phone to call her father about a board decision, and remember freshly each time that the call would go nowhere. Faster in the professional sphere, where the company under the combined weight of the fraud recovery, the restructured board with Ryan now serving in a genuinely collaborative capacity rather than an adversarial one, and Nathan's steadily expanding oversight program began to show the kind of institutional health that made even the skeptical members of the leadership team start to speak differently about the changes that had come out of a coastal rainstorm 8 months earlier. Paul Garrett pled guilty in August to fraud and received a sentence that included restitution and 18 months in a federal facility. 2 of the contractors involved settled civil suits that recovered nearly $3 million for the company funds that Claire, with the board's unanimous support, redirected into an employee training fund named quietly without fanfare after her father. Nathan's oversight program by the end of that year had been implemented across all 23 properties, and the maintenance discrepancy rate, the number that had first alerted Claire's auditors to the fact that something was deeply wrong, had dropped to a fraction of what it had been, low enough that the company's insurers reduced their premiums low enough that 2 competing hospitality groups reached out, asking whether Bennett Hospitality would be willing to consult on building similar programs for their own properties. Nathan turned both offers down without hesitation. "I don't want to build this for other companies," he told Claire, when she asked why, half joking, that he could probably charge a considerable consulting fee. "I want to build it for this one. I want to finish something, Claire. My whole life I've been good at fixing individual problems, one aircraft, one hydraulic line, one broken car on a dark road. I've never had the chance to build something that lasts. This is the first time. I'm not giving it up to go be a hired gun somewhere else." "That's not very ambitious of you," Claire said, teasing. "I've got exactly the ambition I want," he said. "I want to raise my daughter well. I want to build something that outlasts me at a company I believe in. And I want—" He stopped. "What?" Claire asked. He was quiet for a moment, and then he reached into his jacket pocket, the same jacket she realized with a small jolt that he'd been wearing the first night, or one nearly identical to it, because Nathan Reed was not a man who bought new jackets when the old ones still worked, and he took out a small box. Claire's breath caught. "Nathan, let me get through it," he said. And his hands, she noticed, were not entirely steady, which was rare enough for this particular man, that it made the moment feel even more significant. "I've had this thought in my head since about the 3rd week I knew you, if I'm honest. Though I want to be clear, I did not act on it that fast, because that would have been insane, and also because I needed to make sure this wasn't some kind of storm and rescue fever dream that would fade once things went back to normal." And, Claire said, her voice unsteady, "It didn't fade," Nathan said. "If anything, it got more certain every single month. Through the investigation, through you crying in my arms, in your apartment doorway, the morning your father died, through every dinner and every phone call, and every time Lily asked us both invasive questions about our wedding plans that we hadn't actually made yet." He opened the box. Inside was a ring, not extravagant, not the kind of thing that would have looked at home among the jewelry Claire could have easily afforded herself, but clearly chosen with real thought, a simple band with a modest stone that caught the light in a way that felt honest rather than showy. "I picked it out myself," he said. "No consultant, no jeweler recommendation from anyone in your world. I wanted it to be something I chose because I saw you in it, not something a professional told me you'd like." Claire had both hands pressed to her mouth. "Claire Bennett," Nathan said, and he got down on one knee in the middle of her apartment in the ordinary evening light, with Lily's homework still spread across the coffee table because she'd been doing math problems there 20 minutes earlier, before Nathan had asked Helen to take her for the evening. "I did not go looking for you. I want you to know that because I think it matters. I wasn't looking for anything that night. I was tired and late and thinking about apple juice and a pasta castle with structural problems in the north turret. But I found you anyway, standing in the rain, and I have not for one single day since then regretted stopping that truck. You are the most extraordinary person I have ever known. And somehow, impossibly, you looked at a Navy mechanic with grease under his fingernails and a truck that only heats on one side, and you saw someone worth building a life with. I would like to spend the rest of mine proving that you were right to see that." Claire was crying too hard to speak for several seconds. "Yes," she finally managed. "Yes, Nathan. Yes." He slid the ring onto her finger, and she pulled him up and kissed him, and somewhere in the apartment unnoticed, until this exact moment, Lily's voice rang out from where she had apparently not gone to Helen's at all, but had been hiding behind the kitchen counter the entire time, filming the whole thing on Nathan's old phone, with the fierce, triumphant focus of a 7-year-old who had clearly been planning this covert operation for weeks. "I got it on video," Lily announced, emerging from behind the counter with the phone held aloft like a trophy. "Also, does this mean I get the dog now? Because those were my terms, and I want it in writing." Nathan turned half laughing, half mortified. "Lily Rose Reed, were you hiding behind the counter this entire time? You said I was going to Helen's in 20 minutes, Lily said, entirely unrepentant. "You didn't say I had to leave before the proposal. I did my research. I know how these things work." Claire, still crying, started laughing too. The two feelings tangled together in a way that felt somehow like the truest possible summary of the entire year behind her grief and joy, occupying the same breath loss and discovery. Arriving in the same season, a woman who had lost her father in the spring, finding herself engaged by autumn to a man who had never once in 8 months asked her for a single thing except honesty. "Fine," Nathan said, shaking his head, pulling his daughter into the hug with both of them. "You get the dog." "I knew it," Lily said. "I'm going to call him Admiral." "We haven't discussed—" "Admiral," Lily said again with the finality of a decision that was not in fact up for further discussion. They were married the following spring, in a small ceremony at a property that held particular significance, not one of the 23 hotels in the Bennett portfolio, but the original motel outside Roanoke, the one William Bennett had built with his own hands decades earlier, which Claire had quietly restored over the winter as a tribute to her father, converting it into a modest, dignified retreat that the company now used for employee gatherings and small private events. It felt right to be married there on the ground where the whole family enterprise had begun, under a sky that was mercifully clear and blue, with none of the storm that had started everything 8 months before. Ryan gave a toast that made half the room cry, mostly because he broke down twice in the middle of it and had to stop and compose himself, and when he finally got through it, he raised his glass and said, "My sister has spent her whole life being the strong one, the one who held things together. I used to resent that, if I'm honest, resent that Dad trusted her with the weight of it and not me. It took me 38 years and a rainstorm neither of us was even present for to understand that being strong and being alone aren't the same thing, and that my sister needed someone who could let her put some of that weight down without making her feel like she'd failed by needing help. Nathan, you gave her that. You gave our whole family that, honestly, because you also gave me my sister back, in a way I don't fully know how to explain, except to say thank you." Helen Patterson sat in the third row, weeping openly and unashamedly through the entire ceremony, and afterward told anyone who would listen that she'd known from the first week Claire started coming around that this was different, that she'd seen a lot of women come and go in Nathan's orbit over the years, and none of them had ever made him laugh the particular way Claire did. Lily was the flower girl, and she took the job with characteristic seriousness, distributing petals along the aisle, with the calibrated precision of someone who had clearly practiced the walk multiple times in the living room, and at the reception, she gave a brief, unscheduled speech of her own, grabbing the microphone from a startled best man before anyone could stop her, in which she informed the assembled guests that her new mother had promised her a dog named Admiral, that the promise was legally binding because it had been witnessed, and that she considered the wedding itself to be, in her professional opinion, as the flower girl, extremely well organized, 10 out of 10 would recommend. The room dissolved into laughter, and Claire, watching her new daughter take a small triumphant bow before handing the microphone back, felt something settle in her chest that she recognized with sudden clarity, as the specific, unmistakable feeling of having arrived somewhere she was always supposed to be. Even though the road there had wound through places, she never would have chosen a flooded highway, a fraud investigation, a funeral, a hallway full of whispers that had eventually gone quiet, because the work had spoken louder than the gossip ever could. Admiral turned out to be a scruffy, exuberant rescue mutt of indeterminate breed that Lily selected from a shelter 3 weeks after the wedding, with an intensity of purpose that suggested she'd been mentally preparing for this exact moment since she first floated the negotiation over a plate of roast chicken. He chewed through 2 pairs of Nathan's work boots in his first month, and according to Nathan's frequent complaints, seemed constitutionally incapable of understanding that furniture was not in fact for climbing. Claire adored him completely, and without reservation, in the particular way people do when they've spent most of their adult life too busy to have a pet, and are discovering somewhat late exactly what they'd been missing. Nathan's maintenance oversight program by its 3rd year had become something of a quiet industry case study, not through any effort of Nathan's, who remained resolutely uninterested in publicity, but through word of mouth among hospitality executives who'd heard about the dramatic drop in Bennett Hospitality's operational losses and wanted to understand how it had happened. Nathan gave exactly 1 interview to a regional business journal in which he was asked what advice he'd give other companies looking to prevent similar fraud. His answer, printed nearly verbatim, became something people at the company quoted for years afterward. Paperwork tells you what someone wants you to believe. Go look at the actual thing. Every time. No exceptions, no matter how much you trust the person who filed the report. That's not about distrust. It's about respect for the truth. The truth doesn't care about anyone's feelings, and if you build your systems around comfort instead of verification, eventually, someone's going to take advantage of that gap. Claire kept a framed copy of that quote in her office, next to a photograph of her father standing in front of the original Roanoke Motel the year he bought it, and next to that, a small glass dish holding a single gray stone that a 7-year-old had once declared lucky, because she'd decided it was so. On the 5th anniversary of the night, Nathan pulled his truck over on a flooded coastal highway. The family drove out to that same stretch of road Nathan, Claire, Lily, now 12 and taller than either of them, had quite adjusted to, and Admiral considerably grayer around the muzzle, but no less enthusiastic about car rides. They didn't do anything elaborate. They stood on the shoulder where Claire had once stood alone, arms wrapped around herself, waiting for a stranger who turned out to be exactly the person she needed, and Nathan put his arm around his wife's shoulders and looked out at the water in the distance. "Do you ever think about how close we came to never meeting?" Claire asked the same question she'd asked once before years earlier, standing in nearly this exact spot. "I used to," Nathan said. "I don't anymore." "Why not?" "Because I don't think it matters how close we came to missing each other," he said. "I think what matters is that we didn't. Every single variable that could have gone differently that night, the storm, the cell signal, my shift ending when it did, your meeting running late, all of it lined up exactly the way it needed to for me to see you standing there. I've stopped wondering about the version of my life where that didn't happen, because it's not the version I'm living. This one is." Lily, walking a few steps ahead with Admiral straining against his leash towards some fascinating smell in the roadside grass, turned back and called out, "Are you two being romantic again? Because I can hear you and it's a lot." "We're allowed to be romantic," Claire called back. "We're married." "You've been married for 4 years, Lily said. "There should be a statute of limitations." "There isn't one," Nathan said. "Ask your grandfather's old business partners. Some things you don't put a price tag on, and you definitely don't put an expiration date on them either." Lily rolled her eyes with the practiced exasperation of a preteen who had nonetheless spent every single night of the past 5 years falling asleep in a house that felt entirely unshakably safe, and who understood better than most children her age, because she'd watched it built in front of her from the ground up. Exactly what that safety had cost the 2 adults who provided it, and exactly what it was worth. She came back and slipped her hand into Claire's on one side and reached for Nathan's hand on the other, and the 3 of them, with Admiral trotting ahead, walked back toward the truck together. The same truck, still running, still requiring a specific lift and pull technique on the passenger door that Nathan had never quite gotten around to fixing because some things he said you kept exactly as they were, as a reminder of where you started. Claire Bennett had built an empire out of the simple idea that a hotel's real value wasn't its thread count, but whether a stranger left feeling less alone than when they arrived. She had spent years surrounded by people who wanted something from her, who saw her wealth before they saw her, who measured every relationship by what it might yield. And then, on an ordinary Tuesday evening in a coastal storm that neither of them had chosen, and neither of them would ever forget, a Navy mechanic with a broken heater and a crayon drawing taped to his dashboard had pulled over for a stranger in the rain, wanting nothing in return but the simple, old-fashioned certainty that some things you did because they were right. He never knew in that first moment that she was a millionaire. It never once occurred to him to ask. And that in the end was the entire answer to everything that followed. Not the money, not the company, not the fraud he uncovered, or the position he earned, or the ring he chose, without anyone's help. The answer was a man who stopped in the rain because his father raised him to believe that kindness given freely was worth more than anything. It might one day return, and a woman who had spent her whole adult life waiting without knowing she was waiting for someone who would prove that belief true. They found each other in a storm. They built something that no storm would ever be able to take away again.